Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon to those of you who are following us from India. My name is Charles Powell, and I'm the director of the Elcano Royal Institute here in Madrid. And it's a great honor and a pleasure to be hosting today's webinar on EU-India relations, a geopolitical necessity, which the Elcano Royal Institute is hosting, or rather co-hosting, together with the embassies of Portugal and India here in Madrid. And I have with me the ambassadors of Portugal and India, João Mira-Gomes and Sanjay Verma. Good morning, good afternoon to you as well. And it's a great honor and a pleasure to be hosting this session. As I said, we are all fully aware, and I think increasingly aware, of the importance of EU-India relations. This isn't, sadly, a topic which probably receives or has received the attention that it undoubtedly deserves, at least not from European think tanks such as ourselves. And this is precisely why we are very pleased to be able to co-host this event this morning. And without further ado, I want to hand over to Ambassador Mira-Gomes for his introductory remarks. Ambassador, the microphone is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning to everybody. Good morning, good afternoon in India. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to join this webinar on EU-India relations, leading up to the upcoming EU-India summit, which will take place in Oporto on the 8th of May. I wish to thank my dear colleague, Ambassador Sanjay Verma, and also my dear colleague and friend, Charles Powell of the Royal Institute Elcano, for your collaboration in organizing this joint initiative. Let me express our regret that Prime Minister Modi will not be able to attend the summit in person due to the pandemic. Allow me also to convey my sympathy for the difficult situation in India, and also all our support and also all our solidarity. I would like to add a word of thanks to our distinguished panelists, the government representatives, and the experts joining us from Portugal, India, and Spain. As indicated in the title of the event, EU-India relations constitute a geopolitical necessity. The reasons for this will be made clear by our panelists. As you know, strengthening EU relations with India is one of the priorities set out by the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union in the current semester. And Portugal's strong historical, cultural, and human ties with India make this a natural priority, if I may say so. Let me recall that the first EU-India summit took place in June 2000 in Lisbon, also during the previous Portuguese presidency of the European Union. But what makes this relationship a geopolitical necessity is the growing geostrategic importance of the Indo-Pacific region. In this regard, India is a key EU partner, together with other democracies in the region. As we enter a period of profound global socioeconomic transformations, many of them accelerated by the pandemic, we consider that the EU must engage with India in key areas, namely trade and investment, climate, and the digital agenda. Therefore, and despite the difficulties posed by the pandemic, we have great expectations for the upcoming meeting of EU leaders with Prime Minister Modi on May 8th. And our hope is that we will set the basis for a more intense and a more productive relationship between the European Union and India, so we can take full advantage of opportunities, but we can also together face the challenges ahead. I hope that this discussion contributes to highlight such potential. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And let me also take this opportunity to express my condolences to those who've lost their loved ones in the current pandemic in India, and my solidarity and, of course, best wishes moving on ahead. Ambassador Verma, the floor is yours.
Well, Excellency, Mr. Francisco Andre, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, my colleague and friend, Permanent Secretary from New Delhi, Dammu Ravi, Ambassador Mira-Gomes, Director Elcano, Mr. Powell, Dr. Harsh Pant, DDG Carmen Cano, Mario, Ruben, and Sandeep, namaste, good afternoon, buenas tardes. Thank you for your sympathetic words and support as India bears out the second wave of the COVID-19 crisis. With your support and the work being put in by my government, we are very confident that in the coming weeks, we will reverse this ugly trend of rising numbers in fatalities. Let me begin this afternoon's program by congratulating my dear colleague, the Ambassador of Portugal, for first suggesting this interaction about 2 months ago. And his suggestion has finally borne fruits. And today we have a lovely fair awaiting us. Excellencies, colleagues and friends, disruptions define our age, disruption in the accepted global order, in the economic system, technological disruptions. So we have geoeconomics, geopolitics, geotechnology, or geohealth. All these are areas of contestations of our times. It is therefore business, not as usual. I was in Barcelona last week for some business meetings, and I was really shocked to hear what some reputed business houses in Barcelona had to say about supply chains. I was talking in particular to a technology company in the electronic industry, and the gentleman told me the shipments now from China, which used to take up to 2.5 months, are now taking up to 6 months, and sometimes they're being told that may take up even longer. Some commodity prices have increased because of cartelization. So supply chains are in the sky, up in the sky. So how do like-minded countries, individuals, entities deal with these disruptions? Now, India and individually EU countries like France, Germany, Spain, and Portugal share excellent bilateral ties, very strong bilateral ties. But somehow, and this is a challenge, and this defies basic math, is how is it that the sum of individuals falls short in aggregate at the European Union? Is there an external shadow which casts itself on the prospects of EU-India geopolitical cooperation? Can we do more to inform the elected members of the EU Parliament about the larger and long-term implications of stronger EU-India relations? Do we need to nudge popular media in both our geographies to the positives, to the global order of an aligned EU and India? Clearly, shared values and sensibilities can only be a starting point to a new EU-India partnership. May I also add that if the Indo-Pacific is the new geopolitical currency, then as a primary stakeholder in that space, relations with India do assume a sharper edge. Strategic autonomy requires assured partnerships. India and the EU need each other. May I also suggest that Spain can emerge as a driving force in taking many of the working areas of the India-EU relationship forward, be it trade, investment pacts, sustainability, green energy, freedom of navigation in the Mediterranean, or simply even stronger cultural or people-to-people connect. Spain can bring a lot to the EU-India table. Well, these are just some of my early thoughts as an apparative for a heavy main course which awaits us. But before I conclude, I thank Royal Elcano Institute for joining hands with us for this webinar. In recent years, Royal Elcano Institute has become one of the most highly rated think tanks anywhere. And I wasn't pleasantly surprised to see that you have clipped the Chatham House in a recent ranking. So I await the day when we are offline in a similar webinar, and we can begin the conference by saying that we will today be following Royal Elcano House rules. I'm sure that day is not too far. Similarly, the other partner from India is ORF, whose credibility and international reach and the pace at which it has grown is unprecedented, I would imagine, on the global table of think tanks. ORF and Royal Elcano are old partners, so it's apt that they are here together. And so let me conclude by wishing this webinar all success. And here, over to you, Charles.
Thank you very much, ambassadors, both of you, dear friends, for those introductory remarks. And as you very rightly pointed out, Ambassador Verma, it's a great pleasure to be doing this in collaboration with our friends at ORF, who have always been our natural partners in India. So without further ado, I'm going to call on our first three speakers to join me now to begin to explore some of the issues and questions that have already been raised by Ambassadors Mira-Gomes and Verma, who have whet our appetite, and we now have to provide the group as a whole with some more food for thought. I'm first going to be joined by Dammu Ravi, who is Additional Secretary at the Ministry of External Affairs of the Government of India. Thank you very much for joining us. I will then call on Mr. Francisco André, who is Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and Cooperation at the Portuguese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And last, but by no means least, we will be joined by Carmen Cano, who is Deputy Director General for South and East Asia at the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And after that, I will hand over to my friend and colleague, Mario Esteban, whom I also want to thank for assisting us in putting this event together. And he will be moderating the expert panel that will start at approximately 12:45. So without further ado, Mr. Ravi, the floor is yours. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Charles, for introducing me. And I also like to take the opportunity to thank the extraordinary role played by the governments of both Spain and Portugal for bringing this interactive session together, and particularly the Elcano Royal Institute for putting all this together. I also acknowledge my friend Sanjay, the Indian ambassador there in Spain, and my colleague Sandeep Chakravarti, who works closely with me here in Delhi. So let me first at the outset thank all the governments of the EU countries for their solidarity with India in this time of crisis, in this time of devastation that the second wave has caused to us. I mean, your solidarity and your support is indeed gives us strength to live through these difficult times, and all the donations that are pouring in from EU countries, we are really indeed grateful. Now, let me come to the main topic and the substance of it. First of all, we need to acknowledge that this forthcoming summit is happening at the time of the Portuguese presidency of the EU. And we go back in memory that in 2000, it was again Portugal which laid this foundation for such kind of a summit level interaction between India and the EU. We're indeed grateful for the kind of support they've given. So relations between India and EU have evolved quite significantly since 2000. In the last 2 decades, India has evolved. The relationship have become multifaceted, and both sides are exploring new areas for cooperation, deepening cooperation in existing areas. We all know that our relationships are underpinned by democratic values and principles, and that really gives us strength to indeed engage more deeply and be able to talk issues, whether you agree or disagree, but we have that platform, we have that confidence that 2 sides can talk very openly all the issues that we really feel close to. Now, in any relationship, fundamentally, the trade and economic and investment relationship takes the big carve out. In the sense, it tends to take, it hijacks the entire relationship, and that is where it defines also how the relationship is going forward. But if you look at that aspect of it alone, India and EU have not done badly. We are about 77 billion euros bilateral trade and evenly poised. The FDIs on both sides are growing, but I believe there is a lot of room to improve, and we could do it. If we have the commitment to do it, we should be able to take forward this relationship much, much stronger. Of course, when we both sides discussed the India-EU free trade agreement, the bilateral trade and investment agreement in 2007, it was negotiated over 6 years' time, and then in a very small areas of disagreement, this deal couldn't go through. But I believe there were other geopolitical issues, for example, the Brexit, and then you have the new developments globally that prevented this thing to go forward. Then the ambition levels at this point of time, we are trying to reset, but we believe that the preconditions that the US is setting, the EU is setting, would need to be calibrated. I believe that we should discuss in open spirit to be able to raise this ambition level. Already our ministers through the high-level dialogue on trade and investment have discussed this quite extensively. And India has an open mind, and we believe that we should be able to easily reach an ambition level of 95% tariff liberalization on our side. But what we need to be very careful about is any trade deal need to be a win-win situation for both sides. It has to create that kind of a situation, or else it would make no sense. The industry on our side keep asking again and again, why are you making a deal when the EU is not giving you much? And this is the kind of question that we have to confront with the industry. Your tariffs are already low, but you have another form of protectionism, if I may have to say, and be frank about it, which is the non-tariff barriers. Your standards are so high. Your regulatory frameworks are so discouraging for our industry to penetrate. The SPS TBT measures have, over a period of time, have discouraged our industry to penetrate your markets. Now, these are the kind of difficult issues that are raised by the industry, and we are unable to explain to them, which is why I think there's a need for the EU and the member countries to understand where we are coming from and to be able to calibrate that approach. If we have an ambition of 94% tariff liberalization, I believe that is a fantastic deal to begin with. And we should grab it. Both sides could discuss further, and where it settles, we don't know. But I think that's the art of negotiations. We have to come to an understanding that, yes, we are prepared for negotiating a trade and investment deal, an ambitious one, and that will send a very good signal to our leaders next month. And also send a strategic signal on the part of both India and the EU. Now, investment is an area that is of deep interest for us as much as it is for trade for the EU. Now, if there are issues that are really bothering the EU, we should be able to address them, especially your protection, investment protection, the return on investments, all these sort of concerns which we are willing to address. Already, India has announced several initiatives like the product linked incentives, which India has announced recently. This is a fantastic initiative, I believe, which is very, very attractive. The entire idea is that we need to together create alternative supply chains. I think the world cannot depend on just one source. We need to have multiple sources on which you can deal and engage with, so that we are able to assure all the countries that there is uninterrupted source coming in from various places. The other important area I'd like to highlight here is how India and EU can work together on the multilateral trade rules. And this is very important, especially keeping in view that it is in our collective interest and it is in the global interest that no country is able to engage unfair trade deal, and no country is going to dump their products in any country. And this is a very important area we need to work together. The reform of the WTO is doubly important at this point of time, keeping this in view. The other important area is the intellectual property rights. And I believe both India and EU have a common interest in ensuring that the humanity is able to have access to affordable medicines. Then again, we believe that EU and India can work together on the TRIPS elements, and the waiver for COVID vaccines would be an important point at this point of time. Both India and EU can work together. Now, how we achieve this is a different matter, but I think we can put our heads together. In the same sense, I'd like to again emphasize on the resetting of the multilateralism, which is an important dimension of the entire debate on the globalization, the issues that affect the entire world. So there again, we need to have the global rules, and we need to let the nations comply with these global rules for global stability and global peace. Now, rightly, EU has come out with a paper on the India-specific strategy. I think that is very timely, I believe, and we are looking at a stronger cooperation and engagement with EU on that front, and we should be looking at new ideas, for example, cooperation in technology. Not necessarily we are looking at connectivity issues, but I think cooperation in technology in the digital space, connectivity issues, and freedom of navigation. These are all very important for the entire world. But if India and EU could take a lead, it would make a big impact in the Indo-Pacific strategic area into the future. Now, of course, everybody knows about what we are doing in the energy area, but I believe there are issues that we can together work on, particularly in terms of clean energy technologies, where India is already cooperating in the solar, in the hydrogen energy with some of the EU countries. The technology, again, is very crucial for us. But I think what is crucial, and EU need to be concerned about it, is how do you make the entire world climate friendly? And here it comes in the transfer of technologies, the financing issues. These are critical elements that need to be addressed. We cannot say that, okay, only countries, we need to take commitments and move forward. It is in our collective interest to help other nations also be part of this commitment to make the world a safer place to live. I'll leave my thoughts at this point of time, friends. I'll come back to there should there be any other questions to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dammu, and thank you for being quite candid about many of the challenges that are facing the EU-India relationship. I think it's important that we should recognize those issues if we really do want to move this relationship forward. And perhaps I would ask Francisco, if I may, to address in your remarks specifically, what should we expect from the May summit in Oporto? Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to Mr. Powell, Mr. Ravi, Ms. Cano, ambassadors, and ladies and gentlemen. Allow me at the onset to express, first of all, on behalf of the Portuguese government, our total solidarity and support to the people of India in this time of need. Our thoughts and prayers are with you, and also the European Union has activated already its civil protection mechanism, and work is underway in order to respond rapidly to your request for assistance and to stay together with you in this fight against the second wave of this pandemic. And together, we believe that we will overcome this virus. Getting back to the main subject of today, it's both an honor and a privilege for me to address this gathering. In this regard, a special word of thanks goes to the embassies of Portugal and India in Madrid, and to, of course, the Elcano Royal Institute for this very timely event. In fact, in less than 2 weeks, the Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union will host the European Union-India Leaders Meeting. This was due to take place physically in Oporto, and now it will be conducted in a non-presential format due to the pandemic. We are anyway confident that this will be an event of considerable significance for the EU-India relations. And as mentioned by our Prime Minister last November, this meeting will be one of the highlights of the Portuguese presidency when it comes to foreign policy matters. The commitment of Portugal to deepening the EU-India relationship comes a long way. It was, in fact, during the 2000 Portuguese presidency of the European Council that the first ever summit between the two took place. Despite taking place on a virtual format, its importance cannot be downplayed. India ranks among the fastest growing economies in the world and remains, to this day, one of the European Union's largest trading partners. It is an increasingly relevant global player, and given our shared values of democracy, rule of law, and human rights, it can only be perceived as a pillar of our wider relationship with the Indo-Pacific region, a region where geopolitical competition is increasing, adding tensions on trade and supply chains, as well as in technological, political, and security areas, including, of course, maritime security. The contribution that we can jointly make to some of the challenges we face today may prove of enormous value, be it on the fight against climate change and the achievement of the SDGs, the greening of the economy, the fostering of an open and fair environment for trade and investment, or on the digitalization of our societies. EU and India have, for sure, a common interest in each other's security, but not only that, also in prosperity and sustainable development, as this common interest will also benefit others in this interconnected world we live today. And this is why we look forward to sending, in light of the ongoing discussion and rebalancing European partnerships and bilateral relations in the Indo-Pacific region, a strong public signal of both parties' commitment to work together towards the implementation of the roadmap to 2025 and of the conclusions of the high-level dialogue on trade and investment, both agreed in last year's summit. Portugal expects that the EU-India leaders meeting will make most of the current political momentum, leading to concrete deliverables on the main areas of focus this year: health, climate, environment, digital trade and connectivity, and also foreign and security policy. We must indeed realize the full potential of our relation. Launching a connectivity partnership during this year's meeting would constitute a major contribution in this regard, and it would certainly build on our presidency's focus on the digital dimension, on the need to improve links between the European Union and India, and the synergies between our bilateral cooperation on connectivity with third countries in the Indo-Pacific region. We also expect to see progress on our bilateral cooperation on trade, including geographical indications and investment. Portugal is working with the European Union and India towards reaching an ambitious understanding in time for the leaders' meeting, which may encompass a decision on the launching of the negotiations for a new bilateral investment treaty, an instrument for the protection on geographical indications, and a roadmap for the negotiation on a bilateral free trade agreement. The European Union and India constitute two of the largest trading blocs in the world, and our economic relation is already, even without a comprehensive trade and investment framework, a powerhouse. Nevertheless, its growth potential remains enormous. Lastly, we see this meeting as an opportunity to further work together towards ambitious climate action and clean energy transition, and as an opportunity to transform our economies with a view to reach carbon neutrality. Finally, India is a key partner in the efforts towards promoting resilient global health and addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, including the production and distribution of vaccines in the framework of COVAX. In the dire times, we also hope that the meeting may contribute to lay some of the groundwork towards achieving an ambitious partnership on healthcare, namely on pharmaceutical compounds. In conclusion, a lot of potential remains untapped, both in our bilateral relation and in our bilateral cooperation regarding the wider Indo-Pacific, a region that will be at the forefront of geopolitical and geoeconomic concerns for decades to come, where India will have an important and decisive role to play, and where the European Union will surely want to step up its presence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary of State. In fact, you are the second Portuguese Secretary of State who has joined us. Your colleague, the Secretary of State for European Affairs, joined us not long ago. So it's a great pleasure to see how the Portuguese presidency of the EU is also contributing to strengthen our relations with Portugal. I can begin to see certain themes developing. The idea of unfulfilled potential, I think, is very much a part of this scenario. But at the same time, I'm also hearing that the pandemic is adding an extra sense of urgency to our shared goal of strengthening EU-India ties, and of course, particularly in the health field, as has just been mentioned. So let me turn now to Carmen Cano from our Spanish Foreign Ministry here in Madrid. Thank you very much for joining us, Carmen. And perhaps I was hoping that you would also address this feeling that our Indian colleagues and friends often have, that despite their excellent bilateral relations, including, of course, with Spain, the EU is a difficult entity to negotiate with. It's a difficult entity sometimes to understand. We Europeans, of course, don't always understand the European Union either. That goes without saying. But perhaps you could say something in particular, to address this concern that that despite these very close and growing bilateral relations, this doesn't always result in an easier EU-India relationship. The floor is yours, Carmen. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Charles. It's difficult to explain all that in 7 minutes, but I will try to do my best. I'm very honored to share this panel with Secretary Ravi and Secretary Andre, and I will try to add some food for thought, as you said before. I would like to start from the new geostrategic framework where we are. This was difficult to foresee 10 or even 5 years ago. The central stage has moved. We have the impression that it has moved from the Atlantic, even the Mediterranean, to Asia and the Indo-Pacific region, where we find more than half of the world population. And this is a region that in 2050 will probably represent half of the world's growth. Now is just 30% of global GDP. In the Indo-Pacific, we also find 2 of the biggest markets with China and India, and 3 of the most important world economies. This is in this region too, where we see the tensions between the new power and the existing one. So the European Union in Asia and in the Indo-Pacific region has always been seen as an actor. And in this context, an actor which is capable of counterbalancing this tension, promoting stability and promoting economic growth on the basis of principles and values that we share with India: democratic values, human rights protection, multilateralism, a rule-based world order, which is applicable to trade, to public goods, to territorial disputes. And this is the intention behind the Indo-Pacific strategy that the European Union just announced. The idea is to strengthen the EU presence in the region in an inclusive way, and that's why Spain has worked with other member states to define this new strategy. We think that the Indo-Pacific strategy also opens new opportunities for cooperation with India as a key strategic partner. But this initiative, it happens in the middle of very dramatic circumstances. We are all fighting COVID. We are struggling to recover from this terrible crisis. There are many lessons learned also from COVID that are reflected in this strategy. I think that COVID is a test. It's a test for governments, but especially a test for societies. And in these tough times, we have discovered and we have rediscovered old friends. And this also applies to the EU and India. The heartbreaking images that we saw from Delhi during the weekend are very similar, unfortunately, to the images that we had in Spain 1 year ago. And during this time, I remember that Prime Minister Sanjay talked to Prime Minister Modi, asking for an urgent shipment of hydrochloroquine. Now is the European Union coordinating member states, including Spain, to provide urgent support and send equipment to India. So this is about solidarity. And I think COVID has stressed the importance of solidarity and the interdependency, not only of our economies, but also of our lives. I think Secretary Ravi has already mentioned the vulnerability of supply chains, which is very much interlinked with this interdependency of economies and lives and the need for solidarity. We think that the global response has to be based on international rules. And as every crisis, there are opportunities and challenges. The challenge is huge, but the opportunities, as it was mentioned by the President of the European Council, is having in our hands the opportunity to shape the future, to discuss about multilateralism, to discuss the rules that should be played and respected by everybody, and also the importance in the post-COVID world of a free and open and fair trade as a key to recover from this pandemic. And for the record, the EU is the most open market in the world. So how can the EU-India relations contribute to this? I think there is a lot that can be done between the EU and India, but also between Spain and India. The EU and India are the 2 biggest democracies. We share a lot of values, and there is an untapped potential. I think the summit, the 15th summit last year, was a turning point because there was a firm decision from both sides to strengthen global collaboration, multilateralism, to strengthen bilateral relations, our trade relations, and to re-engage in the negotiations of important agreements, such as our trade and investment agreement, and also to strengthen our cooperation regarding foreign policy and security. It has already been mentioned, the importance of trade for the EU and for India. There are 6,000 European companies in India, and they provide direct employment to almost 2 million people and indirect employment to 5 million people. And some of our biggest companies are already present, Spanish biggest companies are already present in the Indian market. It has already been mentioned by the Secretary Andre, a lot of details and information. Thank you very much about the summit, which will take place in May. In February, already the first session of the high-level economic and trade dialogue took place. And we also had in April the human rights dialogue, which is also an important tool in our relations. We think that the relaunch of the negotiations of our trade and investment agreement will open new opportunities for Spanish companies, Spanish interests to be there, but also for Indian companies and for Indian interests to be more present in Spain. And it will also facilitate a mobility, which is particularly important after the COVID. So very briefly, what is there for Spain in the EU-India relation? What can Spain do? Our foreign policy regarding the relations with India and a strategic partner is very much aligned with the EU foreign policy that we contribute to design. We support the unity of all member states, because when we are dealing with important, strong strategic partners, it's important that the EU remains united. And we are ready to work with India bilaterally on the basis of the possibilities opened by the new Indo-Pacific strategy, climate change solution. There we have our companies with a lot of know-how, expertise, and technology to cope this global challenge, to contribute to a green development of the cities in India. We are negotiating, the EU is also negotiating with India, the connectivity partnership, which will open also new fields of cooperation, bilateral cooperation between Spain and India. Multilateralism is a key word, and all this based on shared values. There is a lot of potential collaboration between our companies, between our societies, between our government, and we just hope that the situation will improve soon, that we can resume and intensify all these contacts, because there is really a lot to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carmen. Since we have a little bit of time, and we have about 100 people listening to us, I would like to ask both Secretary Ravi and our European speakers, what would India like to see the European Union doing specifically in response to the pandemic, and what specifically is the European Union willing and able to do to assist India in this time of need? As Carmen very rightly pointed out, we have all experienced, in Europe, we have all experienced enormous difficulties last year in particular, which came as a great surprise to us. So perhaps I can start with you, Carmen. What specifically is it realistic for us in the European Union to offer our Indian friends, given that, actions speak much, much louder than words, and many of our fellow citizens and our friends in India will be watching this very, very closely. And I think the next few weeks could be quite crucial in this regard. So, or perhaps I will ask Dammu first, what would you like to see the European Union? How can the European Union really step up to the plate in the next few weeks? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles, for that question. But let me emphasize here that we are very much happy with the kind of solidarity and support that has been expressed by several member countries. The European Union itself has, I think the Commission has already conveyed that through this ecosystem that they are going to extend the support, the details of which we are getting it. But the member countries themselves have also expressed their interest to support. Major countries have already indicated the list. We have conveyed to all our ambassadors in the EU countries what is India's requirement at this point of time, which is the oxygen, because a lot of people are definitely needing oxygen for their survival. We have run out of oxygen. Capacities are depleted. So we are expecting that this would be the first #1 item of request, a requirement for India. And then the concentrators, ventilators. Now, these are the primary requirements. Medicines like remdesivir is another major requirement here. So these details we have conveyed to our ambassadors that should there be any offer coming from any member country or individuals or associations or chambers of commerce who want to collectively give, the best way to go is this is our list. But in addition, if there is any other offer coming in, we will study it. We have in the government of India a team that is already looking at offers coming from various parts of the world, and we will quickly respond how much of it we would need. But I think we are indeed grateful for the support, kind of solidarity already expressed by the EU member countries. It's a great gesture for us. It gives us strength to live through this crisis and to be able to brave this crisis. And we, at this point of time, the most important thing is to save the lives. That's a priority for all of us. And thank you so much again.
Thank you. Carmen, would you like to respond to this? And Francisco, if he is still there, perhaps as well? We turn to Carmen first.
I think that the immediate priority, as Secretary Ravi said, is to save lives. And that's also why the European Union joined COVAX months ago, because we think that nobody will be safe until everybody is safe. So I think that's a very important tool. So apart from the immediate help, I think, of course, the EU continues the support to COVAX. And maybe the second step, once we are all, let's say, out from this COVID crisis, is how to recover from this crisis. We will all need to make a big effort to recover from the economic point of view, but also from the social point of view. And it's there where trade, open trade is important, where multilateralism becomes even more important than it is now, where we can start talking about how to reform the system that we have now, the multilateral system, that maybe is a bit outdated, and some organizations should be reformed by consensus so that they can answer to the new global challenges. And I think the EU, and of course Spain, for us, multilateralism is one of our priorities in foreign policy. I mean, we are ready to do that with our partners, especially with our strategic partners such as India.
Well, thank you very much for that, and let me thank our three speakers. I suppose my main takeaway would be that in addition to dealing with the specific crisis that we are all still facing, let's not forget that Europe is still very much in the midst of the pandemic itself. We have to look forward beyond the pandemic to see how the European Union and India can reshape and to some extent reinvent the multilateral system in which we have operating in the last few decades. So let me thank our three speakers very much for their insights. And we are now going to move on to our next session. And I will hand over to my colleague, Mario Esteban. Thank you very much, Mario. Good morning.
Thank you, Charles. Hi, good afternoon. Well, I would like to begin, joining the previous speakers in sending my warmest solidarity to the people in India who is going through these very, very difficult times. I would like also to thank our next three panelists, and also to all of you, all the people who is following this webinar through the internet. This next session is divided into two parts. First, the three speakers will deliver short presentations, around 7 minutes each. And then we will have a Q&A with all the questions that you may send to the following email address: events@realcano.org. events@rielcano.org. And now I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Constantino Xavier. He is a fellow in foreign policy and security studies at the Center for Social and Economic Progress. He's based in New Delhi, and also is a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution. He leads the Shandong Initiative on Regional Connectivity, which examines India's political, security, and economic relations with the South Asian neighborhood. He's also part of several policy dialogues between India, the European Union, and other Indo-Pacific powers, and a frequent commentator for different media outlets. Dr. Xavier's research has been published in various academic journals and books, and he has taught and lectured in various universities, as well as in Indian training institutions. Dr. Xavier, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mario. Can you hear me well?
Yes, perfectly.
So thank you all for hosting this event, and to the Portuguese Embassy in Madrid, the Indian Embassy in Madrid, and of course to Charles and the whole team at Instituto Elcano for making us think a little bit of why this EU-India relationship is a necessity, which is a wonderful title really to ponder about. It's not an option, it's not a possibility, it really is, in this day and age of a global transition, of possible global disorder, a necessity. And I'll restrict my 6-7 minutes to 2 points. I think it's important to clarify that this relationship, the EU-India relationship, is not a reaction.
Very busy,
is not a response to something, but comes in a long line of continuity of outreach towards Asia, from Portugal, Spain, and the European Union in particular. There's a temptation these days to look at the EU rebalance or approach to the Indo-Pacific, for example, as we've seen very recently, as some type of a immediate tactical reaction to the rise of China in particular, to doubts about the future role of the United States in terms of global governance. And I think that needs to be dismissed. And second, I think this is also not a transactional relationship, because it is really beyond just a bilateral approach about flows between the EU and India, and about certain agreements, for example, on energy, on climate, on trade and investments. It is much more a strategic relationship in terms of setting out the terms, the parameters, the principles of the future global order. And there, I think the EU and India have more than the option and necessity. The European Union and India today have the responsibility to lay the groundwork of that future order. And there's tremendous expectations being deposited both on Brussels and the various EU member states on the one hand, and on India on the other hand, by a variety of countries in Asia, in Africa, around the world, to steer this current moment of uncertainty towards order, predictability, and institutional predominance. For example, in the role of multilateralism, which was just referred. So just on the first point, in terms of this EU-India relationship not being just a reaction towards China and sort of a momentaneous relationship, I think that's important because I keep hearing this from many European quarters that somehow this is just a tactical, momentarily response. I'd like to recall that the foundations of this EU-India relationship go back to the 2000s. Of course, the EU-India Strategic Summit, the first summit being held in Lisbon in 2000, but more important to that, also the 2007 agreement to start negotiations towards a free trade agreement. Those were, I'd say, the foundational moments in the EU-India relationship that are now being revived. Portugal too. Portugal, during its 2007 presidency of the European Union, We had the Prime Minister of Portugal visiting New Delhi then, and there was a long-term thinking in Portugal that growing relations with India were in the larger interest of the European Union's Asia approach. In Spain, I'm reminded of, for example, your former ambassador here, João de la Riva, who played a very important role in founding Casa Asia, but also as an ambassador at large for Asia Pacific. This is again a period, if I'm not mistaken, he was ambassador at large between 2005 and 7 or 8. Again, Spain was thinking ahead, and most recently, again, through its 2018 Asia strategy, I think has revived that Asian line of thinking in Spanish foreign policy. And today, therefore, I think more than sort of a reactionary tactical approach to Asia or the Indo-Pacific, you're seeing the EU and its various EU member states reviving those threads of its initial Asia policy of the 2000s that was a victim, I'd say, of the 2008, 2009 economic recession, isolationism, protectionism. There's really momentum here that is more one of continuity than of a new beginning. And therefore, I think it's very clear why the Portuguese presidency made it clear early on in 2020, even during the dire circumstances of the pandemic, that it would use India as its first external priority during its presidency, and that India was going to be an essential and primary element of what the Portuguese foreign ministers described as a European rebalance effort towards Asia. And therefore, that centrality of India, I think, is coming out quite clearly in the Portuguese presidency, and it will culminate in the summit in Oporto, or held virtually to that effect very soon. Finally, I think for Spain too, we see this all over in your 2018 strategy for Spain in Asia. And therefore, I don't think it's a coincidence that countries like Portugal and Spain, may I call them small and middle countries for simplistic purposes here, but that these countries are taking a leading pioneering role in pushing the EU to adopt a common approach towards the Indo-Pacific, towards connectivity in Asia, towards a maritime strategy as the one the EU adopted a few years ago, focused on the Indian Ocean region and on the, for example, principle of freedom of navigation. It is not expected otherwise, I'd say, from France or Germany to take an important role in this effort. But that is not surprising. That is expected from middle powers at the global stage, such as France and Germany. But what I find interesting, but again not surprising, is that you have these smaller countries, including Lisbon and Madrid, among many other countries, including Scandinavian countries, taking a very strong leading role in this effort. The second point is on not exhausting the EU-India relationship in a transactional, tactical engagement. And I would like to warn against this, because I see a lot of temptations on both sides to get away with a quick leader summit, a few good political takeaways, signaling in terms of language, the EU adopting the Indo-Pacific as a term, India showing that it has revived some type of an economic outreach to the EU and a possible new economic partnership deal. I think it is incumbent on both the European Union and India to go beyond a transactional approach that focuses on tactical increases in terms of investment flows, trade, a quick deal on alignment of policies on climate, for example. And it is incumbent to go beyond that. And what I call laying the foundations for a long-term, sustainable, peaceful world order. And this, I think, reflects both the EU and India's comparative advantages in terms of being countries or blocs, if you want, in the case of the EU, that realize that principles matter as much as power, but they matter too. And let me finalize giving you 3 examples of where I see a principled convergence happening between the European Union and India, beyond just transactional flows to shape tactically the current world order. And as I mentioned, sort of concerns about a possible US role in Asia and a possible Chinese role in Asia. First, I think on data governance, to give you an example of why I think this is critical for the European Union and India. Any debate on data governance strikes at the heart of the contractual nature between the citizen and the state that both the European Union and India share, that Russia does not share, that China does not share. This is at the heart of the philosophy of the European Union integration process and of every European Union member state, and at the heart of the Indian state's philosophy, that there needs to be a balance between privacy, individual rights of citizens, and concerns and interests, whether economic interests and security interests of the representative democratic state. So I see a lot of potential there for the EU and India, not only to strike a data sharing agreement, a bilateral agreement, but to lay the foundations for a future governance order that regulates this difficult problem of regulating privacy and data governance. Second example of multilateralism. I think the EU and India both realize that it is in their existential interest to carve out space that takes on the shape of institutions that are autonomous and able to mitigate the great power rivalries we are seeing emerging in Asia and around the world. So both the EU and India have a stake in the health and in the organizational autonomy and in the respect for institutional processes of the United Nations, of the World Health Organization, of the EU itself, or of ASEAN, for example, in Southeast Asia. So I'd say that is also a fertile, cooperative working ground for the EU and India to strengthen that rule of law at the institutional level. Finally, and I'll end with this as a third example, where I see substantive connectivity for the European Union and India to work out the terms and the principles of the future world order is on capacity building to support other countries around the world to strengthen their institutional resilience, their technical capacity to take informed, independent decisions in this rising era of great power, rivalry, and turbulence. What I mean here is that the EU and India both have phenomenal institutions at their service to train and support and equip other countries in Africa, for example, in the Indian Ocean region and across Asia to fend off the turbulence of, I'd say, clashing pressures from the US, from China, and from other actors in the system that are trying to sort of, I think, make these countries choose one significant alignment or path. And I think both the EU and India realize that they can support through resilient institutions, sustainable connectivity infrastructure, these countries to preserve their strategic autonomy and therefore not fall into the dependency trap of any exclusive sphere of influence, whether it is an American one, a Chinese one, or any other one. I'll end my remarks here and hope to discuss this more in our discussion coming up. Thank you, Mario.
Thank you so much, Constantino. I particularly appreciate how you emphasize the structural relevance of EU-India relations and the normative dimension of that. And let's move now to our second speakers in this panel, Ruben Campos. He's a senior research fellow at the Elcano Real Institute and programs coordinator at Club de Madrid. He's also visiting professor in different universities in Spain. He is an expert in international relations of South and Southeast Asia, as well as in Spanish and EU foreign policy towards these regions, with a special emphasis on India. And he is also an expert on nonviolent political movements, and he has published on that in an academic perspective and also in the consultancy world. Ruben, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mario, and thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation. I would like to make two big, let's say, parts from my intervention. The first one is the looking on the positive, and the second one more on the challenge, no, and what should be done, no, to take advantage of the positive framework, no? And first, about the positive, I think this is a very welcome event, no, because I think we need to highlight and give visibility, no, to this shared necessity that the title of the webinar is directing, no, the EU and India relationship. We need to make this a necessity, and Constantino has, I mean, presented key ideas why this should be something structural. No? So we should not focus on short-term gains or short-term visibility through the summit, which is of course welcome, but how this structural relation should be strengthened. So in this positive element, I will welcome the growingly awareness of political bodies, including member states and the European Union, in terms of the relevance of India and the region. No? And I think the US new very recently a strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific are pointing to this direction. And I think it's key that to bring this concept of Indo-Pacific, because that brings the importance of India and the region from an Indian perspective to the forefront, and especially because, as Constantino was saying, the shared values that we have, that is not the same kind of relation that we can develop with India that we can have with China, that we have with Russia. And this is very important, no? Because for many different issues. So this common conceptual approach is welcome. I think that the developing of relations is needed, but how to do it, no? And in the how, I think is when we see the challenge. And my point is that even if we have a level of consensus between the experts on the importance of this should reach to the higher levels of political decision makers, or also public opinion, both in India and the European Union. And I think that that's one of the challenge that we have, because and I can put the example of the free trade agreements and the negotiations, because on both sides, and as Constantino was saying, this is a long-term process that has not started recently. I mean, a negotiation for the free trade agreement started in 2007 in the last process, and in 2013 they were suspended because there is no clear agreement on site. And if you go to the web page of the European Union, you see that there is a lack of ambition in terms of finding a final agreement, and that led to the suspension. And I think that that's a challenge, no? And then the Secretary of State from India referred to that in his intervention, no? That from the Indian point of view, when the free trade agreements were put on the table, the Indian industry has not clarity about what are the advantages of this agreement, no? And what is in this agreement for us. And I think both sides should make a stronger effort, no? First, to understand the other, the challenge, the limitations, the constraints that each of our society has. And at the same time, give more flexibility to our own positions, no, to reach this agreement. And maybe it's good not to talk more about ambitious free trade agreement, but go to a more, let's say, realistic agreement that can move forward the potential of this economic relationship. No? And I think that maybe a more concrete and specific agreement cooperation could be welcome. In terms of opportunities, I think the COVID crisis that has been referred is a clear one, no? Because to give visibility and to give support from public opinion and from key decision makers in both sides, I think this COVID crisis gives clear room, no? And the current challenging situation in India should be a moment in which the European Union can rise to the occasion. I think that, and we have heard from official representatives that now, support is in the way, and there are, EU countries that have been sending, and the European Union as a whole, aid in terms of the oxygen emergency and needs that are in India right now. COVAX process is also mentioned, but I think we can go a step further, no? And why not support the India and South Africa proposal already submitted and presented on October, no? To temporarily waive intellectual property and patent rights on COVID vaccines, because without full vaccination or at least a significant percentage of vaccination of countries, the situation of COVID is going to be a challenge. And India has its own process of vaccination, his own vaccines that are working, but to reach to such a huge population that they have, this kind of international support will be essential, no? And the EU showing this, let's say, special support, I think that would be more than welcome. I'm not naive because this is a very complex issue, taking into account, I mean, many relevant actors and interests, but why not to put that on the table? Why not to try to go a step further, no? To give this bold and clear, let's say, example, no, of support for the bilateral relations. So I think right now, I mean, we can talk about many other issues, but COVID is, I mean, the main and influence in all our lives. So why not to push this as an example? I think that many other things can be done, and there are. I would like to highlight a couple of issues before finalize. First of all, the EU and India relations has a double dimension from the European side. I mean, you have the European common policy and the way in which we collectively and in a consensual way deal with India. And we have also the bilateral ways in which all the countries, members of the European Union, deal with India. And I think that from the European side, I mean, as much as possible that we can focus on the consensual and using the European Union as a platform to deal collectively with India, that will be to our advantage. And I think that from the Indian side, maybe that's a good way of thinking, no? I mean, to try to coordinate their efforts to the region through the European Union, no? I think both sides should make an effort for this, because I think that at the bilateral level, of course, there will always be, I mean, key elements of discussion, economic-wise and in other elements, but to make a collective effort from both sides to focus on this EU-India level, I think that would be beneficial in the long term. And another element, and final from my side from the moment, is that we should find innovative ways now to try to pursue these bilateral relations. For example, I see opportunities in interparliamentary discussions involving also the European Parliament. I mean, involving youth members, union members of the Parliament in India and in different countries of Europe and the European Parliament to have discussions together about these issues, because we need to involve decision makers to make this change, I mean, viable and concrete. Because one thing is to have a consensus at the think tank level or the expert levels, but the day-to-day, I mean, decisions should be guided by this. And in this sense, for example, this exchange between parliaments could be a good tool for mutual understanding and finding this common ground. So that's my remarks for the moment. Thank you. I look forward for the discussion later.
Thank you so much, Ruben. Now let's move without further ado to our third speaker in order to have some time for the Q&A at the end. Now I would like to introduce Professor Harsh Pant. He is Director of Studies and Head of the Strategic Studies Program at the Observer Research Foundation in New Delhi. And he's also a Professor of International Relations at King's College and a non-resident fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. His current research is focused on Asian security issues, and his most recent books include New Directions in India's Foreign Policy, Theory and Praxis, India's Nuclear Policy, and the US Pivot and Indian Foreign Policy. And all these three books have been published by major international publishing houses. Professor Pant, he also writes regularly for various Indian and international media outlets on these issues. Professor Pant, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you to all the organizers for having me as part of this conversation. I think both Constantino and Ruben have pointed out the large gamut of issues that are involved in this discussion. I would touch upon a few which I think are shaped by more contemporary realities. Part of the issue I think here is there has never been any doubt that EU and India can and should be working together more on a range of issues, and I think almost taken for granted attitude. I think the question that the title of the conversation today is whether it can be converted from a purely economic relationship to more of a geopolitical relationship, a geopolitical necessity. And I think that's where some interesting developments have happened. Most importantly, what I think Ruben was pointing out in terms of just the fact that what has happened in the last year or so has shattered a number of assumptions that I think underpinned our approach to global politics, global affairs, and global governance. And therein lies this window of opportunity for both European Union and India. And we have seen a number of things happening, both in terms of the evolution of European Union's thinking, India's own thinking on a number of issues. So perhaps when you're looking at moving from a theoretical debate about EU-India partnership at a geopolitical level to a more operational partnership, this is the moment that allows you to think more creatively and more perhaps ambitiously. One of the problems has been that for the last 2 decades, for all the protestations about being a strategic partnership, the partnership was slightly boxed up into different categories. So largely we were focusing on economic affairs, at times multilateral engagements. But from India's perspective, the problem I think always ended up being that European Union was reluctant to emerge as a geopolitical actor. There was a time when European Union said we don't want to do geopolitics. And India, of course, looked at its own neighborhood, its own evolution, its own balance of power in the region, and there was all geopolitics. So I think there was a distance there that needed to be covered. And what last year has done is to sort of shatter that glass ceiling or that glass divide or that barrier. And in that sense, I think some of the conversations that we can have today, I think Tino is right that this is not all about China, this is not about America. But I think what has happened in the last year has allowed us to more openly discuss our challenges in a way that perhaps before COVID we were not. We were all, talking in a coded language, and perhaps we still will. But I think the challenges that the last year has manifested and the last year has brought out into the focus, perhaps have allowed us to have a more honest conversations, both within ourselves. For example, India's reevaluation of its own foreign policy, many dimensions of its own foreign policy. And I think similarly, what European Union's reevaluation of elements of its own foreign policy, what it wants to do with certain countries, how it wants to relate to those countries, and how it wants to engage in the climate of economic competition and deglobalization, decoupling whatever is happening. I think those sorts of that space that we now have allows us perhaps to have a more honest conversation today than ever before. And I think that's a very good start for any kind of an engagement, and especially for an enterprise like this, where we are all sharing our own, inhibitions and trying to make a case that this is a partnership that really needs a geopolitical dimension, and that time has come, and therefore that necessity needs to be imbibed by both sides. And I would just touch upon, 3 basic ideas. One is, of course, the changing balance of power. Now, this idea, again, it's not that it suddenly started in 2020. We were all talking about it, but mostly in theoretical terms, mostly in conceptual terms. Balance of power is changing, powers are rising, powers are falling. Some countries are emerging as more powerful. What do we do? Whether we will change the global dynamic, how it will change. But I think what happened last year was that it told us that rising powers, declining powers, they all have real-time consequences. What we saw in terms of the debates about institutional mobilization, how certain institutions worked, certain institutions did not work, how the global governance architecture failed, how the institutional and normative architecture started fragmenting. I think all those questions were related to that fundamental aspect of what was happening to the broader change in balance of power and some real-time consequences. And I think that pushed both European Union and India to look at their own assumptions. What happened with India, is very well known. India has been, coming to terms with the fact that even as it was fighting a pandemic, it was also fighting a neighbor. It was also standing up to a neighbor on the Himalayan borders. It was also challenging its own foreign policy assumptions about how to work with that particular neighbor. Similarly, European Union was also, looking at recasting its own assumptions about how do you deal with certain kinds of countries that were creating issues on global governance, that were creating issues on supply chains. And I think all those questions have become very operational today. Though these questions were being discussed more more academically before, and now we are talking about them more operationally in a day-to-day conversation about policy making in real time. So I think changing balance of power, that how it impacted our normative and institutional fragmentation. And finally, I think the whole debate on economic globalization. And this is where I think European Union perhaps has a very important role to play, because the idea that we had initially, that look, trade and technology collaboration, leads to a world order that will be more cooperative in its framework. That assumption has been changed. I mean, now we are talking about collaborating on technology, collaborating on trade, or undertaking trade with only like-minded countries. There is a sense that, from trade brings peace to we will only trade with those countries that are, that we are comfortable with. There has been quite a bit of a transition there in terms of our own thinking about what greater global cooperation in certain spaces does and does not do for global affairs. So I think when you look at that space, there is a fundamental reassessment going on, and there you bring in powers like European Union, India, which have very similar. I think if you have an honest conversation on these topics, you will find that there is very little difference on certain matters, especially what the experience has been over the last 1 year or so. So in that sense, this idea that European Union is now suddenly saying that, look, we want to do geopolitics, we want to be in the Indo-Pacific. Of course, Indo-Pacific is not new to European Union, but the context has changed, and the way it wants to operationalize its own engagement in the Indo-Pacific has changed. And that's welcome news for India, because that India has always maintained that India needs India would welcome greater balance in the Indo-Pacific. We would like more like-minded countries to be present there, engaged more broadly, so that a more stable balance of power can be created. And that's something that can now be operationalized with a number of countries now talking both individually as well as now European Union coming out with its own Indo-Pacific articulation. So I think that's very welcome from India's, from New Delhi's perspective. If one is sitting in New Delhi, this is a new dimension to the old EU-India relationship, which lacked this dimension. And this is a very important dimension from India's perspective. Similarly, if you're sitting in Brussels, you're looking at an India that is also more than ever before willing to contribute to global governance. And that's, I think, a very welcome development from Brussels' perspective, that India is now willing to take charge of certain issues. India is willing to openly shoulder some responsibility. If you saw India's role during the health crisis, it's quite a remarkable change. India was proactive. India was out there. India was doing things which some of the richest and most powerful countries in the world were not willing to do. And Ruben's point about vaccines and how WTO intellectual property is a very valid point in that sense, that for a country like India, we are the idea that unless everyone is vaccinated, you really can't make a transition to a stable global order is something that needs to be pushed forward. So you are looking at at a reality from if you're seeing it from Brussels' point of view, that India that is willing to for the first time perhaps in decades willing to shape the global order. The Indian policymakers are now saying we are willing to be rule shapers rather than rule takers, and that's a welcome development, because the complaint has been that India does not want to do much on global governance, that India says a lot but does not when it comes to doing things. India is reluctant. So I think there has been a shift from both sides, and that shift within the kind of vacuum of global governance that we have seen over the last year, given the kind of challenges that we have seen COVID presenting to us, certainly makes Indo-EU relationship a geopolitical necessity of our times. And I think that's where I would like to end. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harsh. We have received quite a few questions, and I would like to divide them into three sets of questions. First, those related with norms, values, and here I would like to identify two main questions. One is related with this concept of like-minded countries. I mean, because we've talked a lot about values. We're talking more about like multilateralism. We are talking more here about democracy, human rights. I mean, how can we define this idea of like-mindedness when it comes to cooperation in the Pacific? And that's one of the sort of questions related with that. Another is related with the practical cooperation related with the SDGs, with the Sustainable Development Goals. Constantino mentioned this idea of cooperation and capacity building, and there are some questions on that, how this could be put into practice, and in the context of other initiatives like the BRI, by China, and also this strategic, well, not this partnership between the EU and Japan on quality, infrastructure and sustainable connectivity, and also some questions on this SDGs dimension related with climate change, because it's a huge challenge for the world and also for the EU, but also in particular for India. India, is very vulnerable to climate change. So there's some questions about how this EU-India cooperation on climate change, could be moved forward, and how relevant that could be in the bilateral partnership. Finally, some questions on the Indo-Pacific guidelines. This strategy very recently released. You've talked about that, and this recently released by the EU. What's your assessment on that, and how do you think that this could serve as a platform for EU-India cooperation? Because there are different views here. So it seems that some people in the audience think that it could promote that, but some people seems to be a little bit disappointed by the lack of ambitions on this initiative. So how are your reactions to that? If I may, maybe the order now could be the reverse order. So maybe Professor Pant maybe could speak now first.
Yeah, thanks, Mario. I'll try to take some of them. One can say that, look, there is certainly a lack of ambition in European Union's guidelines that have recently come out. I would not go that far. I think for me that if you look at the trajectory, that is important. The fact that an organization like European Union, with all its complexities, with all its huge number, 27 odd states coming together and trying to figure out what to do in the Indo-Pacific, is in itself a big challenge. So the fact that the guidelines have come is a welcome change, and the fact that European Union is now willing to play a more important role in the Indo-Pacific is a welcome change. The fact that Indo-Pacific, as we have seen individual countries in as member states of European Union coming out with their own Indo-Pacific policies or strategies. To have an Indo-Pacific, a European, pan-European, pan-EU approach to the region is certainly a welcome development. If you're looking at it from a geopolitical perspective, primarily the evolution, as I was suggesting earlier, is more important. The shift is more important. The signaling is more important, and I think that's what these guidelines do. In operational terms, how they are played out, what kind of roles they are going to play, it still remains to be worked out. And I'm sure there are differences in the way various countries approach it. Even there are differences even between the so-called Quad member states on what Indo-Pacific is, for example, or how do you operationalize the idea of Indo-Pacific. But that has not prevented those countries from coming together and working out a mechanism to deal with the challenges. Similarly, I think as European Union goes forward with its own thinking on this maritime space, these guidelines are bound to evolve in a certain direction, and which I think in itself is a welcome development. The issue on what can be done on various issues of SDGs, whether it's connectivity, climate change, we have different dimensions. There are multiple dimensions to that question. I would say that, look, in some ways, if you're thinking of, if you go back to to the normative discourse on BRI, India was the first country to oppose BRI. And at that point in time, many member states of European Union were in favor of BRI and they supported BRI. But India was the first country to sort of articulate a response to BRI in normative terms. Yes, there was an element of India's national security and national interest involved. But I think there was a larger issue of what BRI represented, and India presented it to the world at that point in time. And many of India's friends, including many members of European Union, said that that's not the right approach. And India should be collaborating more and working and trying to work something out. But I think what has happened over a period of time is that India's articulation of those values, of those norms, are actually now the common refrain from most major states. Even European Union, for example, articulates the same position on BRI. So I think what has happened on SDGs is that, especially on connectivity, is I think India's approach has been imbibed by a lot of by the European level itself. So I would say that there has been more osmosis in this in this space when it comes to certain issues on SDGs, especially on connectivity, where countries are now willing to work with each other in third countries. For example, you were talking of European-Japan initiative on quality infrastructure. That is a welcome development. There was an initiative For example, like Japan and India working together in Africa, Asia-Africa Growth Corridor. It has not really taken off in the way that perhaps many would have liked, but certainly, the thinking has evolved in that direction. So I think, my basic point is that I think there is a lot of learning that is going on from both sides. And finally, on like-minded countries and values, I think, values are often this very difficult thing to categorize and work around. But they do matter in some sense. I think, as I think someone mentioned, Tino or Ruben, that some of the conversations that you can have, that European Union and India can have, we can't really have with a country like China or Russia. So there is a certain sense in which those values matter. But the question, I think, again, is whether you have a strategic framework where those values are embedded, or we are using values in an ad hoc manner to just simply, respond to a strategic hollowness. There is no strategic ambition, and therefore we keep on using the word. And I think EU-India relationship in the past can be accused of doing that, because the relationship was not moving forward. We used to often fall back on, at the end of the day, we are all democracies. We are all, we believe in a certain normative order, and that's why we should work together. And I think as the relationship becomes more strategically mature, and I think that as the element of geopolitics gives it a certain sense of realism, I think values will become, the issue of values perhaps will become more effective in shaping the trajectory of this engagement.
Thank you, Harsh. And we have like 5 more minutes, so we are a little bit tight on time. So please, Ruben and Tino, just answer the questions. You may feel like to, you don't have to cover, all of them. And so now, Ruben, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think that referring to this US strategy in the Pacific, I think, yes, I mean, the first step that we have just visualized, I mean, this week is a very mild approach, but the step forward of conceptualize and include the Indo-Pacific concept and started to focus, part of the foreign policy on that framework, I think is a step forward. And we need to look forward to new, advance, through the High Representative Borrell, that need to articulate this vision in the next months into concrete, steps. I think that in terms of the multilateralism approach and how this value issue is relevant, I think that on the multilateral level, we need to work all together, all member states of the United Nations. And I think that the ones that have in mind that an inclusive rule-based and multilateral order is of relevance, we should join hands. And the way that we can share values, with democracies like India, that can be another element, to join hands together on certain issues. And I think on that, there are certain aspects of the discussion that will be essential, and Constantino has mentioned, data governance on digital issues. These are key discussions for the situation of the world now, or the future, that are going to have a huge influence. And yes, I think that we can have a lot of commonalities, in terms of EU and India position, and that partly is because the shared values that we have. So why not take advantage of this? To have a common position on these debates at the global level.
Thank you, Ruben. And now, Tino, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, gracias, Mario. I'll try to restrict myself to a few points very quickly. One, this perception that the EU is not, a collective EU approach is not needed for Asia. I hear that in some European capitals. We will deal with China and India on our own terms, bilaterally, delegate some minimal role to Brussels. I will use a trade union's metaphor here, but collective bargaining power is essential to navigate this turbulent world and to deal with a country that really is a juggernaut in Asia, at least, called China. So there, for sure, we need a collective approach from the European Union. In fact, I'd say many Asian countries expect the EU to approach it, the EU member states to approach it to a common voice and a common policy. Number two, following also Professor Pant's view on this awakening in Europe to geopolitics, it's an awakening, but the EU is a geopolitical actor. Look at 5G and the debate there. Look at AI and tech. look at conflict stabilization and the amount of European investment in mitigating conflicts and preventing conflicts and responding to crises across Asia. And finally, look at development assistance and infrastructure financing. The EU amount to Asia outmatches Chinese amounts by a factor of 4 or 5. So the EU is very much a present voice and actor in this region. Third, you mentioned the SDGs. Article 16 of the SDGs speaks about strong, fair, resilient, and if not mistaken, transparent institutions and justice. There are strong normative inbuilt mechanism in the SDGs that speak to the EU and India, and I'd say not to China. And I think there is a choice between looking at different connectivities with Asian actors. There will be a connectivity approach to China, which the EU should pursue and must pursue, of policy harmonization and connectivity, sort of standardization of expectations on both the Chinese and the European side. But I'd say that India and the EU must go beyond that and work on the softer, normative, principled substance of connectivity, which again speaks about their focus on transparency, rule of law, open and free and fair practices of financing. And finally, let me end at this. I think we should not be under the illusion that the EU and India will be able to carry this mandate of shaping the new order alone, the EU and India. This will have to be done in triangulation and coordination with the US, with Japan, with ASEAN, with Australia, with many African countries and the African Union in particular. So the EU and India will have to steer and pioneer this debate, but they will have to do it collaboratively with other like-minded actors that are concerned about the future turbulence in world order. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tino. Thank you again to all the speakers. And we've covered so many issues, so many topics, but I think that the main conclusion is that we need to keep going with the conversation in the future, because I think it's quite obvious that this geopolitical dimension of the EU-India relation is just getting strength, and it's going to develop, you know, in the future. So let's keep tuned. I hope we will meet again sooner than later in order to keep discussing about these issues. Okay, thank you so much. Bye-bye.